Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here in very mild Chicago. I'm kidding. It's like 96 degrees today, so hopefully this will lend soon. It's supposed to, but still wishing I was in southern Italy in Campania and with our guest Federico Basso from the winery Villa Raiano. Ciao.
Hi everyone. Hi Tom. How you doing?
Good. We were just talking about the weather. Tell us a little bit about the weather right now and how the growing season has been and so far in 2020.
Yeah, okay. It's been quite balanced so far. The weather now is mild, I'd say, quite sunny. We had to anticipate the harvest by 1.5 weeks this year compared to the other years because the summer was quite hot, quite warm, and quite dry. But so far, I'd say we cannot complain. Yeah, we're having a good yield, good production. So we hope it keeps at this level. So yeah.
Fingers crossed, right? So
yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned you had started the harvest for the spumante. You're just about to start.
Yeah, we started 1 week ago. We started harvesting Fiano di Avellino and Greco di Tufo grapes for spumante. As you know, those grapes for the spumante have to have a higher level of acidity. So what we do is, compared to the still wine, we anticipate the harvest by a couple of weeks. In fact, next week we're gonna start with the Fiano di Avellino, harvesting some of the vineyards that are almost ready. Okay. But so far we're focusing on spumante.
And is the timetable for this year's harvest, is it pretty much normal or is it a little early?
Yeah, it is quite normal. We've had some vintages like 2017 that were peculiar. So I'd say that 2020, just like 2019 as well, they're quite average. So if it's up to 2 weeks or of delay, there is not really a huge problem. So yes, normal and quite balanced vintage. We didn't have any hail or anything like that. So far the production is going quite good. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, most of your wines are from Irpinia. And for people that have been to Campania or follow the wines of Campania, they certainly know Irpinia, but there may be some people watching, whether it's live or whether it's recording later on, who know Campania and they look on a map and they can't find Irpinia. It is not a normal map. On a viticultural map, it would be. So if you could explain Irpinia, exactly where it is and the history of that term and how far that goes back and what is so distinctive about Irpinia.
Absolutely. So Irpinia is in southern Italy in the region of Campania. So we're like 45 minutes away from Naples and Salerno, from Capri as well, the island of Capri. But our weather is quite different from the one of Naples and Salerno because we're in the inner part of Campania.
Okay.
And there are two mountain chains that divide Irpinia from Salerno and from Naples. And these two mountain chains affect the weather of Irpinia quite a lot because all the warm and wet wind that comes from the sea stops when it meets these two mountain chains. So the result is that in Irpinia there is roughly 5 degrees of difference, 5 degrees lower than Naples and Salerno, and there is a very high level of humidity, roughly in between 60% every year. We're the 5th rainiest province in Italy, so it is quite wet. So Irpinia, from an historical point of view, the name Irpinia comes from Irpus, which means the land of the wolf. In fact, before being colonized by the Romans, it was inhabited by tribes that chose the wolf as their symbol animal. In fact, we decided to choose the wolf as well. Yeah, correct.
You have it on the corks. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That is our logo. So we wanted to, with the winery, represent our territory in the best way we could. So what happened is 2,500 years ago, roughly, the Romans invaded these tribes in Irpinia because Irpinia is also well known for the production because there are sources of water here. So they invaded the tribes, they killed everyone from the tribes, and they used the water they brought the water to Rome because at that time they had problems with taking water from all around Italy. Still today, Irpinia uses its water not only for its territory, but also for Naples and for the northern part of Puglia. So it's still an important source of water for southern Italy in general.
Okay. And we're basically, when we say Irpinia, we're talking about the province of Avellino, see?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So there is the province of Avellino, and then there is a more narrow area, which is the one that is known for the production of our wines, which are 3 DOCGs, Fiano di Avellino, Greco di Tufo, and Taurasi, which comes from the Aglianico grape, you pronounce it.
Okay.
So other than this, there is also a DOC, which is called Campi Taurasini, still coming from the Aglianico grape, but
okay.
with a different aging process than Taurasi.
Okay. I'm going to put up a photo here, which I believe was right outside your winery, and if you could talk about this, what we're looking at here.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the view from the vineyard, which is on top of the winery. The one that has the green roof, it's actually our winery. So we are in the southwest part of Irpinia, in one of the production areas of Fiano di Avellino. The one that you see, the mountain that you see is one of those 2 mountain chains that I was talking about, and it's called Monte Vergine, Virgin Mountain. And that one, together with another mountain chain, there is right south, so in the back of this picture, are the 2 mountain chains that affect the climate of Irpinia. So this is a production area of Fiano di Avellino, and the company was established in 1996, even though this new winery was only built in 2009. In fact, those vines that you see are roughly 10 years old, actually 11 years old. And with these vines here in this vineyard, we produce our last single vineyard, Fiano di Avellino, which is called Bosco Satrano. In fact, Bosco Satrano is the name of the road where the new winery was established.
Okay. And it was founded, the winery was founded by your father and your uncle, correct?
Yeah, my family comes from another company, which is an olive oil company, which was established in 1904. But my father and my uncle decided in 1996 that they wanted to do something else, something that was more a company that was more into promoting our territory. So Irpinia now is known for the production of water, for the production of hazelnuts, and for the production of wine. So they decided to go for the wine, and they started planting some vines all around Irpinia. And they established the first company, the first winery in Serino, which is only 3.5 kilometers away from where we are now. Yeah. But with that winery, they had some production problems. So what they did only 10 years later, they decided that they wanted to create a new structure, a new production area that was more adapt to focusing on quality in the production of wines. So they established this new winery that has all the latest technologies for what concerns both the production and the aging of our grapes. And in the last 20 years, we also bought several vineyards all around Irpinia because we wanted to have as much land as possible. And we also wanted to, let's say, have different expressions of Fiano di Avellino, Greco di Tufo, and Taurasi. In fact, in 2009, when we started building this new winery, we also started a project. There is a project that's aimed at valorizing Irpinia as a territory and how diverse Irpinia can be. In fact, we started producing the single vineyards of Fiano di Avellino, Greco di Tufo, and Aglianico. And what we did with these wines is we gave them the same aging process. So we have same vintage, same aging process, same grape variety, just to show how diverse the Fiano di Avellino, for instance, can be regardless of the aging process, just how the microclimate affects the wine.
Right, here's one of them you were just mentioned that.
Yeah,
the Bosco.
I have it right here too, Bosco Satrano.
Here.
So Bosco Satrano, this is the latest of the single vineyards that we produced in Villa Raiano, and it comes from the vineyard that we have here in the company. So this is vintage 2017. It's aged entirely in stainless steel tanks. And here we are at an altitude of roughly 500 meters above the sea level. So what we wanted to do with this Bosco Satrano is we wanted to create a different single vineyard Fiano di Avellino compared to the other two that we already have in commerce, which are Ventidue, which comes from Lapio, and Alimata, which comes from Monte Fridan. So just to give you...
There's a photo of some ripe Fiano grapes.
Yeah. This is the harvest that we do. Is everything is harvested by hand. There is no machines whatsoever that we use during the harvest process. And one very important thing that I wanted to mention about the single vineyard Fiano di Avellino is that in the label, we also wanted to mention these are some numbers. These are the geographic coordinates of the single vineyard, so that everybody in Google Maps can go and search where the vineyard is and take a look at the grapes, the vines, everything that regards that vineyard.
That's a nice point. I want to talk a lot about these whites because I'm a fan of white wines in general, and especially Italian whites. I've written several articles about, some of the best Italian white wines. And I think, as good as the wines are from Friuli and Alto Adige and a few other places, these are the best Italian white wines. And one of the things that some of the local journalists tell me is that, you mentioned it before, you said the fourth or fifth rainiest province in all of Italy is because of the rain. That Irpinia is really more suited to white grapes than it is to red.
Definitely, yeah. In fact, we have 2 DOCGs of white wine and only 1 of red wine. Plus, from an historical point of view, Irpinia, even before the Second World War, was one of the most important areas in Italy for the production of grapes. And then it used to export it to other regions before, of course, the DOCGs and everything. So it's always had a perfect climate for the production of grapes, even though before it was mostly red grapes that were produced in Irpinia and all around Italy.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about that? I was going to mention another famous producer, you kind of have to mention it with Campania, but, what people knew for Campania was, like you said, red grapes was the wine Taurasi, which we'll talk about soon. But there was the famous producer, Mastro Berardino, and their Taurasi was and still is legendary. And that's all you sort of saw from Campania, from Irpinia, until really like the mid 80s. And now, 30 years later, there's so many more wineries, so many more producers in Irpinia, not only making Taurasi, but making excellent whites. I mean, how did it all come along? Was it just, you needed to try something different, or you worked a lot on the vineyards, clones? How did that happen?
Well, actually, yeah, Mastro Berardino was the first company that started producing wine in Irpinia. But we've never had a huge culture about wine consumption, especially in the 50s and 60s. Only afterwards, wines from Irpinia started to be known on a national level. So before we were known for the production of grapes mostly, but then afterwards, when technology advanced, we understood that also the aging process, the harvest and everything was something that could be managed and done in Irpinia without having to export the grapes in other regions of Italy. So after Mastro Berardino, there were probably in between the 80s and the 90s, roughly 50 more companies that started producing wines with their own label. And in fact, we were born in 1996. We were the 37th winery that was founded in Irpinia. And now there are more than 250. So wines from Irpinia.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a lot of companies in a very narrow territory.
Small area, right?
Yeah, so wines from actually Irpinia was the first province to have 3 DOCGs in Italy. So we were quite well known, especially in the 80s and 90s, for the production of wines. But then, of course, the territory was not able to communicate itself very well. So plenty of other regions surpassed us in the last 30 years, probably.
Would you agree that I'm sorry, I find that that's still a problem in terms of communication. The typical consumer in America knows the wines of Tuscany and Piedmont and of course Veneto and a few other places, but they're not very knowledgeable about the wines of Campania.
Yeah, that's very true. We still have quite a few problems about communicating our wines. The problems are mostly related to the consortia that we have in Irpinia. But I have to say that, especially in the last 5 years, we're kind of trying our best to invert this trend and to change the mindset of most of the producers in Irpinia. So we're doing a lot in terms of promotion of the territory. We're working together to get everybody to know wines from Irpinia. Of course, you have to understand there is a very long process for a territory to be known, not only on a national level, but also on an international level. But I think that we're on the right path. So especially most of the wineries are having the new generations coming into the winery. So there is new mindset, there is much more knowledge about communication, how to communicate, not only the wines, but the territory in general. So I'm quite hopeful that in the next years, we're gonna get better and better in communicating Irpinia.
Okay, great. Let me go back. We talked about rain, and I have a question from one of the participants. His name is Thomas Kakalios. I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly. And he asks, with so much rain, is disease pressure a constant threat? And does all this rain make organic viticulture difficult?
Absolutely, yeah. Actually, we have a lot of problems with, we have, of course, two types of mold. So Peronospora, I'm not sure what's the pronunciation in English. So Idio and Peronospora.
There is no translation, but that,
okay, perfect.
You pronounce it, yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
perfect. So we also have we produce everything in organics. So we have to put on huge effort to protect the vines from the development of these molds. But every year we lose roughly, I'd say, from 15 to 25% of the production due to these problems. So what we do is roughly we do treatments, I'd say once every 2 weeks, which is quite intense treatments, because every time you do a treatment and then it rains after a couple of days, you have to go back to that vineyard and do the treatment again. So in terms of costs, I'd say that compared to the area of Napoli and Salerno, we have roughly 40% higher costs for managing the vineyards, and we also have a lower production. So for instance, for Fiano di Avellino, we have a potential yield of 70 quintals per hectare, but we have a yield on average in the last 10 years that was 45 quintals per hectare, so quite low, yeah, due to these two molds.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's start talking about the white wines, and we'll start with Greco di Tufo.
Yeah.
I don't have any images up here, but this is you probably have a bottle there, but your classic.
Yeah, I have it here.
There you go. The classic Greco di Tufo with that beautiful new label. I have the 2018 vintage. Is that current or is it 2019?
This is 2019, yeah.
19, okay.
Yeah.
Talk about Greco, of course, being Greek, so we're talking about a lot of history in this area. So the Greeks being sort of the founders, of the people that colonized this land. So talk about this particular grape, what makes it special.
Okay, so Greco di Tufo, as you said, it was imported by the Greeks roughly 2,000 years ago. It was first implanted in the area of Vesuvio. Then in the 1500, there was a plague in Naples. So most of the most important families from Naples ran from the city and they moved inland. So there was one family that was called the Di Marzo family. They brought for the first time the Greco di Tufo, the grape, in Irpinia, and there they found the perfect microclimate for this vintage, for this grape. So Greco di Tufo is probably the toughest of the three grapes to work with, especially in the vineyard. This is due to the fact that it suffers dry vintages as well as wet vintages. So it has a very low yield, quite lower than Fiano di Avellino. In fact, if you see the DOCGs, the three territories for the three DOCGs, Fiano di Avellino, Greco di Tufo, and Taurasi, Greco di Tufo is the one that has the narrowest territory for the production. So it's only 8 towns in which you can produce Greco di Tufo DOCG. The name Tufo comes from one of these 8 towns, which is called Tufo. But the name of this town is not due to the fact that here Greco di Tufo was first implanted, because Greco was first implanted in another of the 8 towns that I was talking about. But in Tufo, there was a train passing by. So Tufo was quite important for the transportation of the grapes from Irpinia to the rest of Italy. That's why the DOCG took the name of Greco di Tufo instead of any of the other 8 towns. So Greco di Tufo compared to Fiano di Avellino is quite more crispy. It expresses itself much more in the mouth. It's more, we say it's more horizontal and more vibrant than Fiano. Fiano is much more elegant. Greco has a bigger structure than Fiano di Avellino. This is aged entirely in stainless steel tanks, and now we released the vintage 2019, which is the newest vintage. And also for Greco di Tufo, we have vineyards all around the area of Irpinia, those 8 towns that I was talking about. And actually, we bought 3 more hectares of Greco di Tufo last year, and we're now doing some experiments to see how the vineyard performs in a dry, in a balanced, and in a wet vintage. So we're increasing the production year by year.
Good. And the last 2 vintages, 2019 and 2018, I just tasted 2018. I've had 2019 from other producers. Both seems to me beautiful wines, beautiful vintages. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, 2018 and 2019, we didn't have any problems quality-wise. We only had problems from a quantity perspective. In fact, 2018 was a quite wet vintage in which we had a decrease in production of 35%, so quite high decrease in production. But still, we managed to pull out a very good wine that vintage. 2019 was much more balanced than 2018. We only had some problems of hail. I think it was 27th of April. But we had a decrease in production of, I'd say, 25% in our vineyards of Greco di Tufo. So overall, they both performed quite well. I have to say that, of course, now, if you taste both of them, 2018 vintage expresses itself much better than 2019, but that's only due to the fact that it's 1 year more mature than 2019, because especially still in Italy, there is this culture of consuming white wines as soon as possible.
Right.
But actually white wines as well as red wines can age very well, especially wines from Irpinia can age for up to 10 years with no problems. So for Greco di Tufo, what I advise is to wait at least 3 years to open the bottle. That's the time when the wine really matures and can be exciting.
Right, and that you're talking about your classic offering. I mean, you also make a single vineyard.
Yeah, we make a single vineyard that is called Ponte dei Santi.
Okay.
There you go, Ponte dei Santi. This is also a new vineyard that we bought actually in 2016. This is vintage 2017. And it's 7 hectares, 5 of which are in the town of Altavilla and 2 of which are in the town of Chianca. The name Ponte dei Santi, Ponte in Italian means bridge, and Santi means saints, holy. So there is a bridge that connects these 2 towns that is called Ponte dei Santi. So we wanted to also give a name to this single vineyard that was reflectant of the fact that the vineyard was in 2 different towns. So Ponte dei Santi was the ideal name.
Right.
The first release was vintage 2017. We're talking about vines that are 25 years old, so still quite interesting. And the soil is mostly made of clay. So it's a soil that suffers especially dry and warm vintages, as it was in 2017. In fact, we usually produce 7,500 bottles of this wine, but we had to decrease the production of Ponte dei Santi, and we only produced roughly 3,000, 4,000 bottles in this vintage. So yeah, we had a huge decrease in production that year.
And as far as harvest on first Greco and then Fiano, is that a typical September harvest, or are we looking at October? Or?
Usually Fiano matures faster than Greco di Tufo, roughly 3 weeks. We start harvesting Fiano 3 to 4 weeks before we harvest Greco. Greco matures almost at the same time as a Glianico, which is a red grape. So also in this, Greco di Tufo is a quite peculiar grape. We started last year harvesting Greco di Tufo roughly beginning of October.
Okay.
Beginning mid of October, and we're planning to start harvesting Greco di Tufo this year, probably at the end of September. While what we do with Fiano di Avellino is we start the harvest beginning of September. So we have the whole month of September in which we only focus on harvesting Fiano di Avellino. Then, of course, it mostly depends from the position and the altitude of each single vineyard. So, for instance, the vineyard of Montefusco, which is the highest that we have at 650 meters above the sea level, it's probably going to take a little bit longer to mature than, I don't know, vineyards that are 450 meters above the sea level. So it is, it mostly depends not only on the geographical position of the vineyard, but also on the vintage.
Okay. Well, I have a question, and it ties in with the bottle I'm going to show you, but I showed you before. But I first learned about your winery with the wine called Greco di Tufo, wine called Contrada Marotta, which is right here. And I was very sad to learn a couple of years ago that we weren't able to get the grapes from there anymore. And this, I have 2 bottles of this. I pulled out one from the cellar for this presentation. And this is a 2010 vintage, which was a terrific vintage. And I'm sure the wine is still in great shape. So one of the questions we have from one of our participants, thanks to Patrick Nini, who you know, one of your importers. Yeah. You know, I have someone here saying, save them both. But I will take my time with these wines. Don't worry, Cheryl. But tell us about the aging potential of Greco, because I think it's just extraordinary.
Oh, yeah. Of course, it mostly depends on the vintage, but that vintage 2010 can age easily for, I'd say, 20 years with no problems. So what we do is on all of our single vineyards is we do a partial malolactic fermentation. In 2010, it was, I'd say, 40% malolactic fermentation, which allows the wine to age even further than it would normally. And we still keep doing it on every vintage of both Greco di Tufo and Fiano di Avellino, but only on the single vineyards that we have. So Contrada Marotta was the first of the single vineyards that we started producing in 2009. So the vintage that you have is the second release of Contrada Marotta, but we don't have the ownership of that vineyard anymore since 2016. Okay. So 2016 is the last vintage that you'll find of Contrada Marotta Villa Raiano. And of course, given that we don't have the ownership of that vineyard anymore, it was pointless to produce a wine from a vineyard that we don't have. So what we did is we did a research among all the other vineyards that we had all around the Greco towns production areas. And we selected this Ponte dei Santi, which is in the area of Alta Villa. So what we do here, it's a little bit lower. Contrada Marotta is 650, 680 actually meters above the sea level. Here we are at 550 meters above the sea level. But the difference is mostly the exposition. This one has an exposition that is southeast. So it's a perfect exposition for the grapes to mature and to avoid problems of molds and excessive humidity. So I'd say, I don't know if you had the chance to taste this wine as well, this single vineyard.
I did. I visited the winery last year with Sebastiano, your winemaker, and
and it's
lovely.
It's definitely from an organoleptic point of view, it's just up to our standards. I'm in love actually with this Greco di Tufo, with the new one.
Yeah, I was so, like I said, in love with that Contrada Marotta, and was so disappointed when you stopped making it. So I had high expectations. I said, this better be a great wine, and it really is. It's lovely, lovely wine. Great complexity. I'm going to put up a picture here. I don't know if any of your vineyards are here, but this is a picture that I took when I visited years ago, and this was on the cover of my book. This is Montefusco.
Yeah. Montefusco is where we had the vineyard of Contrada Marotta. Okay. And in Montefusco, we had 2 vineyards. One that we still own, which is actually in the area of Santa Paolina, close to Montefusco. It's actually the vineyard of Contrada Marotta is right in front of the vineyard that we still have in Montefusco, but that vineyard is the one that we only use for the Greco di Tufo, the classic Greco di Tufo, which is this one here.
Right.
650 meters above the sea level. Still very interesting piece of land. It's mostly calcareous tufaceous. It's vines that are 15 years old, so very interesting. Usually we start harvesting a vineyard after 3 years from when we plant it, but it starts producing some interesting grapes after 5 to 7 years. And it gets really interesting after 10 years. This is what we did with Fiano di Avellino, Bosco Satrano. We waited 10 years to release the first single vineyard of Fiano di Avellino for the vines to actually mature and start producing interesting grapes.
Okay. But by the way, on this picture, when I've shown this to people and I ask them where do they think that is, they know it's Italy, but almost no one guesses Campania. They'll say, oh, it's Tuscany or it's Abruzzo. And it's just, my point here is that it's beautiful everywhere, and it's especially beautiful in Campania. So please visit. It's a great area. So let's talk about Fiano di Avellino.
Let's go with Fiano di Avellino. So Fiano di Avellino, Greco di Tufo, and Aglianico. Fiano is the only one that we're not sure of where the grape comes from, but we're sure that it's indigenous from Italy. They say they made some studies and it's either coming from Liguria or from Veneto. It's impossible to actually establish exactly where the Fiano di Avellino grape comes from. But Fiano di Avellino is probably the grape that is most representative of our winery. In fact, Villa Raiano is established in San Michele di Serino, which is one of the production areas of Fiano di Avellino. We have several vineyards around the winery, and all of them are Fiano di Avellino. And since we established the company in 1996, we focused a lot on the production of Fiano di Avellino. In fact, if you look at our product portfolio, we have 3 single vineyards of Fiano di Avellino, which are Ventidue, Alimata, and Bosco Satrano, and only 1 single vineyard of Greco di Tufo. So what we did with these 3 single vineyards of Fiano di Avellino is we chose 3 different areas with 3 different features of the vineyard. Just same aging process, same vintage, same grape variety, just to show how Fiano di Avellino can express itself in different ways. And the areas that we chose, I think, are quite important, because the first one, Ventidue, comes from the area of Lapio. So Lapio is the most historical town for the production of Fiano di Avellino. The name Lapio is told to come from Latin, meaning production of grape. The second one is Alimata. Alimata comes from Montefredane. Montefredane is the town that in the last probably 10 years is releasing some of the most interesting Fiano di Avellinos, not only from Villa Raiano, but from all the wineries around Irpinia.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I would say that just from all the great producers that are there, I won't mention their names, but this seems to be sort of a grand cru.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Fiano di Avellino.
So that is the reason why we chose Montefredane as our second single vineyard of Fiano di Avellino, because so far Montefredane and Lapio are the 2 most well-known production areas for Fiano di Avellino. And of course, we introduced the third one, which is the one from the vineyard, so from San Michele di Serino, which is Bosco Satrano. And these 3 names, Alimata, Ventidue, and Bosco Satrano, they all refer to either a specific characteristic of the vineyard or from the road in which the vineyard is implanted. So Alimata, Ventidue, in Italian it means 22, and it refers to the fact that there is 22 kilometers from the winery to the vineyard. So it's a quite close vineyard to the winery. Alimata is in Contrada Alimata, so it's Alimata Road in Montefredane, and Bosco Satrano is in Via Bosco Satrano in San Michele di Serino, so Bosco Satrano Road in San Michele di Serino. So just to identify the areas, the specific roads and production areas of these 3 single vineyards.
And how old are these vines, and what sort of elevation above, how many meters above sea level?
Okay, for Ventidue, Fiano di Avellino, we're talking about vines that are roughly, I'd say, 35 to 40 years old. In fact, part of the vineyard is in Tendone Avellinese, which is Pergola Avellinese, is an old like production style, I'd say. So with the vines that they're not on the ground, but they are elevated and they go and cover actually in between the lines of vines. Here we are at 450 meters above the sea level. And what's interesting about this vineyard is that it's, we did some studies about the soil, and there is a layer of sand in the vineyard. It's mostly calcareous tufaceous and has this layer of sand that makes this vineyard perfect for the stocking of water during winter time. So this vineyard doesn't suffer dry and warm vintages like 2017, while the other one, Alimata, is mostly made of white clay. So it suffers a lot of warm vintages and it performs much better in wet and cold vintages. And it's roughly 350 meters above the sea level. The vines are 20 years old, but now last year we had to reimplant 30% of the vineyard. So we lost a bit of the production, and we released the 2017 vintage last year in October. So now we're still selling 2017, and we're planning to release the new vintage 2018 in probably January to 2021. And then we have Bosco Satrano. Bosco Satrano is very interesting. It has a very interesting soil. The exposition is northwest, so it's not a good exposition because you might think that it's attacked by mold every year. But actually there is a flow of warm and dry wind that goes through these hills here in San Michele di Serino that dries up every morning the grapes. So actually the vineyard in Bosco Satrano in San Michele di Serino is the one that has the least percentage of loss due to the development of molds, which is something quite peculiar. And what's interesting about the soil of this last vineyard is that it has a huge percentage of a red clay, which is a type of clay that is quite rare in the area, in the province of Avellino. And I think that this red clay is what makes Bosco Satrano a quite peculiar Fiano di Avellino, because, okay, I'm talking about quite in general here. So we have Ventidue, which is the typical expression of Fiano di Avellino, so quite fruity, quite floral. Then we have Alimata, which is it goes more towards mineral notes. And then we have Bosco Satrano, which is the perfect way in between these two Fianos, the Ventidue and the Alimata. So they're all different from each other, and they all have a perfect place in our product portfolio.
Great. I'm going to put up a picture of the pergola you were talking about, the Pergola Avellinese.
Pergola Avellinese, yeah. Yes, exactly.
And when people travel there, and you're used to seeing these beautiful rows of just standard, spacing, and then all of a sudden they see, vines like this, it's a shock to the system. So, vines like this are probably, 80, 100 years old, something like that?
Yeah, roughly, yeah. The youngest are 40 to 50 years old. These are the youngest that we have. So this is a very traditional cultivation method, which allowed cultivators to also use the soil beneath to cultivate, vegetables of different kinds.
Okay.
So it allowed cultivators to exploit every meter that they had of soil available.
What sort of soils, probably not your vineyard, but what sort of soils are we looking at there?
Right there, I'd say it's not particularly clayish soil. It seems, I'd say mostly calcareous tufaceous. Of course, it's quite tough to say from just looking at a picture, because you should dig a bit and see how it is in the lower layers.
I got it.
But yeah.
And do the grapes on these vines, the bunches, do they ripen a little bit later? Is a slower ripening with these?
Yeah, definitely. For the Pergola Avellinese, yes, it's a little bit lower. I'd say not a couple of weeks, but for sure 1 week. It takes 1 week longer to mature the same way as the Guyot that we use.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that the three Fiano are a little different. I opened up the 2016 Ventidue, and it's a lovely shape. You see the color on it is bright yellow. So
it's a perfect vintage, 2016.
Yeah, and it's in great shape, and it will obviously live. I put down another 10, 12 years. So we talked about aging of Greco before. We talked about aging of Fiano.
So Fiano di Avellino, I'd say mostly quite similar to Greco. So I recommend to open up a bottle 3 to 5 years, at least 3 to 5 years after the production vintage. But for instance, Alimata vintage 2015 won a prize in the US for one of the best 100 white wines to keep in your winery, in your cellar for 30 years. So I'm sure they can last up to 20 years with no problems whatsoever. Actually, one of the best wines that I have now, one of the few bottles that I have remaining is Alimata 2013, which is still in great shape, and it's a 7-year-old white wine.
Now, the question that people that study Greco di Tufo and Fiano di Avellino, the million-dollar question all the time is, which one ages better? And that's the most interesting answer I got was from one of your colleagues at another winery. I won't mention it, but he said that it just the short answer is that it depends on the vintage. Certain vintages are better for Greco, others for Fiano. But what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it mostly depends on not only on the vintage, but also in case you do single vineyard wines on the single vineyard that you select. It's actually, as you said, it's $1 million question. It's impossible to answer and to, well, yeah, it depends. It depends.
Okay.
So there are different expressions of Fiano di Avellino and Greco di Tufo when you age them for a long time. Also, I don't know, if you taste 3 different Grecos from 3 different wineries in Irpinia, they can age and express themselves in very different ways according to how the winery works with the Greco di Tufo and Fiano di Avellino, and according to what vineyards we're talking about.
Okay. Great. Let's move on to Taurasi, which until recently was clearly the most famous wine, red or white, in Campania in Irpinia. There's a bottle here of the 2013 vintage.
Yeah.
It was a lovely vintage, a very big, rich, bright vintage. So tell us about Taurasi and about Aglianico and
Okay, Aglianico, the name Aglianico comes from Hellenicus, which also refers to the fact that this grape comes from Greece, and it was also implanted in the area of Naples, and then it was imported in Irpinia. I have a 2014 vintage with the new label.
Okay.
And what's just a very quick description of the label? We represented one of the 2 rivers here, the shape, the path of the river along the Irpinia territory. So the river is quite important for us. The river and the wolf are the 2 symbols that we wanted to represent on our label. So Taurasi, the DOCG of Taurasi is the eastern part of the Avellino province. We only have 1 vineyard of Aglianico, which is in Castelfranci, 9 hectares, and it has the shape of an amphitheater. So what we have is we have different expositions, different soils, and different altitudes for the Taurasi, for the production of Taurasi. So every year we can select according to how the vintage is. If it's more wet or more dry, we can select the best areas to take for the Fiano, for the Taurasi. So Taurasi, the name Taurasi, the DOCG Taurasi comes from one of these towns for the production of the DOCGs of Aglianico, of Taurasi, and the name of the town is Taurasi. Taurasi is, I'd say, is quite misrepresented in Italy. Most of Taurasi bottles that are open when they're too young. So usually Taurasi, the best would be to open it up 30 years from when it's produced. So 2013, it's starting to say something, but it's far away from being mature enough to really express itself how it should be. The Aglianico grape is a very intense grape. It has a huge structure and it's quite tannic per se. So what we do with Taurasi is we age it for 1 year in stainless steel, 1 year in oak. We use French and Slavonian oak, and then 1 year in bottle. So we try to use the least oak possible. We're gradually switching from small barrels to bigger and bigger barrels, because when you age Aglianico grape in small barrels, in new barrels, it gets too tannic. It doesn't get very balanced. So we're trying to avoid aging the Taurasi for too long in wood, because it can be too tannic and too tough for the average consumer. So
right. This is a variety with a lot of tannins to start with. So
definitely,
why try and highlight the tannins? You should diminish the tannins with it, right?
I'm sorry, I lost you for a second.
Well, I said that it's so tannic to start with that variety. I mean, why would you want to accentuate the tannins? You would want to maybe try.
Exactly. We try to reduce the tannins as much as possible. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. But of course, the traditional way of producing Taurasi is to age it for 2 years in wooden barrels. This is what like the most historical wineries in Irpinia used to do. But now, of course, most of the wineries that produce Taurasi are gradually switching their style to meet consumers. So not everybody likes excessive tannins, and most of the wineries are going toward a more balanced wine. Then, of course, I don't know if you have a glass of Taurasi or Aglianico, you can see that it's a quite intense, quite dense red color. Yep. This is due to the fact that the skin of the Aglianico grape is how do you say, is more I don't have
the skin is thinner,
thicker. It's a bit thicker, than the in fact, in the skin you have the color of the wine. So the thicker skin of Aglianico is also what protects the grape from the high level of humidity that you have in Irpinia. So usually Aglianico, compared to Fiano di Avellino and Greco di Tufo, behaves better when fighting against Peronospora or Oidio. It's we have a lower impact of these two molds onto the Aglianico grapes.
And I just had a question from a participant here about the aging. I know that you cannot release Taurasi until 3 years, but what is the minimum aging in wood for Taurasi?
Minimum aging in wood is 1 year. Now they're now they're changing, and for the Riserva is 2 years.
Okay.
But now they're making a few changes about for having the DOCG, the denomination of the DOCG. For instance, we use the Bordolese bottle, which is a traditional bottle for Taurasi. And to have the DOCG of Taurasi, until probably 6 months ago, you had to have the Bordolese bottle. But now they changed it, and you can also have the Borgognotta bottle. So the Bourgogne, like this one, more or less. So this type of bottle here. So it is changing. We don't know yet what other modifications will be done, but it's said that there are going to be a few more changes to do on the Taurasi bottle.
Okay. And there's another example of Aglianico in Campania called Aglianico del Taberno, which is also DOCG.
Yeah.
And I've talked with producers in both areas, and they say that generally that the Taurasi tends to have a longer aging potential than Aglianico del Taberno. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but then of course it mostly depends on how the winery works with the Aglianico grape. But in general, I had to say Taurasi has a higher aging potential than Aglianico del Taberno. Okay,
so the 14 is your current release on Taurasi?
Yeah, we released it end of 2019. We're planning to keep it until probably mid 2021. Of course, I don't advise to open up a 2014 vintage right now or in 2021. It's wine that is one of those wines that you buy to keep in your cellar for at least 5 more years.
Right. Well, it's nice to hear that that's your current release, because I've tasted new releases from a few producers. Again, I won't mention any names, but it's 2016, which is extremely young. I mean, big vintage, and you know, but so it's good to find a little bit slightly older wine.
Yeah, you know, it's always tough because everybody, I understand them. Every winery wants to monetize, to have a bit of cash flow as soon as possible, but the Taurasi is a wine that needs time. There's nothing you can do about it.
Assolutamente, sì. I have 2 bottles that I found in my cellar of 2008. So either when COVID is over or when you're in Chicago next time, we'll have to open those up. So
yeah,
and that was from what a few producers told me. They said 2010 got a lot of press, but you know, this producer thought that 2008 was really one of the great vintages in the last 20 years.
Definitely, yeah. I also think 2011 was a very good vintage. Okay. Actually, I bought a few bottles from Villa Raiano just to keep it for myself.
You did, okay. Another couple questions here. From Thomas Kakalios, how do you recommend serving your Taurasi? Decant, or do you find it better on the second day?
Probably decant, definitely, okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd leave it for 15 to 30 minutes there to, just decant and take its time.
And on that subject, he also asked about if you ever decant your whites.
Yeah, especially when it's older vintages. For instance, the Alimata, the Fiano di Avellino 2013 that I was talking about is a wine that I like to decant for 10 to 20 minutes, and then I serve it and then I drink it. But it's better to wait a little bit. Okay.
We should briefly mention, we have about 8 minutes left, that you also make a rosato and you also make Falangina, which is another wonderful.
Correct. So Falangina is the only wine that we produce that does not come from the area of Irpinia. It comes from Benevento, which is the nearby province to Avellino, Benevento. And we have one vineyard in Torrecuso. So what's interesting about this vineyard is that before there was a river running through that vineyard. Then it dried out, but the soil kept all the microorganisms. So it's a very rich soil. If you taste our Falangina, is quite different from the typical Falangina because it's much more rich and expresses itself. Falangina usually expresses itself with tropical fruits and with floral notes. So our Falangina is aged entirely stainless steel tanks, and it's a very expressive wine. And then we have the Rosato, which still comes from the Aglianico grape. Aglianico, as I said before, is a tough grape, very tannic, very structured. It's not easy to work with Aglianico when making a Rosato. So we do a maceration on the skins of roughly 9 to 12 hours. So very, very fast maceration with the skin. But then Aglianico has a very intense color. So it's you have to be very careful when doing the Rosato. But I have to say that in the last 3 years, we're selling more and more Rosato than we used to do, for instance, in the beginning of 2000. So it's a good sign.
I'm sure part of it is the popularity of Rosato and the rosés in general, but also because it's so different from what people think of, like with Provence rosé, which are lovely wines and have their place. But for those people like myself that want a little gutsier, a little richer style of rosé, the rosés I've had from Campania, either from Aglianico or from other grapes, are just lovely wines, beautiful, rich rosés.
Yeah, that's very true. Our rosé is not the typical rosé that you find also not only in Provence, but also in other areas of Italy. So we do a different style, an Irpinian style of rosé. Okay.
And then very briefly on the sparkling wines, which I've had, and lovely, Ripa Bassa, see?
I have it right here too. So it's Ripa Bassa. It's at least 24 months on the lease. It's 50% Fiano di Avellino and 50% Greco di Tufo. And 3 years ago, we bought the sboccatrice, which is the machine that's used to do the sboccatura of the metodo classico of the Champenois method.
Origin, right?
Yeah, we produce roughly 13,000 bottles per year, and we use both Greco di Tufo and Fiano di Avellino because we take the structure from Greco di Tufo and the elegance from Fiano di Avellino. So it is a wine, a sparkling wine that we're also being recognized more and more every year. And it's actually getting better and better. In fact, what we're doing is we're doing a research with the University of Naples to select all the indigenous yeasts that we can find in Irpinia, because we want to work a lot on yeasts to try and create a parallel of sparkling wine, which is not made with Fiano di Avellino and Greco di Tufo. We're trying, experimenting with some different grapes. We're trying a Blanc de Noir with Aglianico. We're trying also with the Falanghina. So we're having a lot of fun when working with the sparkling wine.
Great.
Of course, Irpinia doesn't have a history of producing sparkling wine, but it's a territory that can adapt very well to the production of sparkling wine as well.
Yes. When I visited last year, your chef prepared a beautiful lunch, and you have a restaurant at the winery, correct?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So when we built the winery, we focused a lot on incoming. So we wanted tourists to come in Irpinia and to Villa Raiano to experience our territory, our wines, and of course our cuisine. So what we do is we started this partnership with Raffaele Vitale, which is still our chef in Villa Raiano, and he always proposes typical dishes from Irpinia that pair perfectly with our wines, so typical wines from Irpinia. And this is a concept that actually we wanted to work on, especially in 2020. So we wanted to attract much more tourists in 2020. So we wanted to bring them. Actually, I was starting a project of incoming that was very important, but then of course, because of COVID, we had to stop.
Right.
And we had to delay it to 2021. But the whole winery, the restaurant, the chef, they're all part of a bigger project of promoting the territory on an international level.
And you mentioned that the chef produces typical dishes that go with your wine. So what can you name a couple of those typical dishes?
For instance, we have bacala, which is a codfish. That it's a typical, there is I'd say 3 typical dishes made with codfish because we're inland. Right. So from an historical point of view, the only type of fish that you could have here is the one that was dried in salt, so the codfish. And then we also have a very important production of several cheese in it, several different types of cheese. So like the caciocavallo irpino. We also have several dishes made with the dried fruit, like the hazelnut. So we also are starting to produce a new type of tomato. We have our own olive oil production. It's a monocultivar Raveccia. So we use all these ingredients to create different dishes.
Yes, they brought out the olive oils, which are great. There are about 6 or 8 different ones, aren't they?
I'm sorry?
I said you have about like 6 or 8 different olive oils, right? All different.
Oh,
ones.
yeah.
Yeah. They were wonderful.
The most important is Raveccia, is the most well known, and in my opinion, also the one that reflects Irpinia in the best way. So it's very expressive, very intense. It's a tough olive oil. Just as we have tough wines, we also have tough oils.
That's good to know. Any thoughts on a dessert wine production or not?
No, we don't produce any dessert wine. We used to produce them, but now we decided that we wanted to focus on what we produce best. So dry wines. We're starting to work on a sparkling wine. We're trying also something for dessert, but so far we're not releasing anything for desserts.
I did find a bottle.
Yeah.
I have a lot of your wine.
Yeah.
This is from 2003. And his name was
Edon, actually. Yeah.
Edon. And this was Greco and Fiano, correct?
Correct. Yeah. This is from our past winemaker. This is a wine that we released, I think, for 3 or 4 vintages. And it was very small quantities. It actually had quite a lot of success, but then we stopped doing it, and it was probably 2005 was probably the last vintage that we produced of that wine.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying that one of these days. And just briefly, we're at our time limit here, but just another minute or two. But just talk again about the work that you're doing, you and your other fellow producers, your colleagues in the opinion about making the wines better known around the world?
Yeah, we're trying to promote our wines on different levels, both on social medias with the organization of different events all around the world. Of course, there is still a long way, but for instance, I took part to several events in February, I think it was, yeah, in the US. I went around 6 cities in the US to promote not only wines from Villa Raiano, but wines from Irpinia in general. And we saw that compared to the past years, there is much more awareness of Fiano di Avellino, especially, and Torasia's wines.
Good.
So hopefully the situation will get better and better in the next years.
Speriamo.
Speriamo.
Okay. Grazie per questa opportunità. Thank you for this hour today, and
thank you.
Fingers crossed for a very successful harvest.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, I hope to see you soon and to come to the US as soon as possible. It's a pleasure to have the chance to talk about my wines and my winery. And,
thank you, and vice versa. I hope to visit you in Irpinia.
Yeah, whenever you want.
Well, it's not whenever I want. It's whenever I can. It's
yeah, exactly.
I'd like to go next week if I could, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, same goes for me in the US.
Right. Well, again, thank you. Buona giornata.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.